Dallas Cowboys star Micah Parsons misses OTA practice this week, but you shouldn't be concerned. We'll explain why in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. On today's show, we're discussing some of the biggest news and notes coming out of OTA practice on Wednesday and Thursday. I believe the Cowboys have one more OTA session before minicamp starts in the middle part of June. But I want to talk about Micah Parsons, Landon, who was present during Wednesday's practice, and then on Thursday was gone. Did not do anything on the field, wasn't even off to the side. How concerned are you about Micah Parsons missing so much of the offseason?
This is going to be a kind of a weirder take a little bit. Look, I think there's two things here, right? There's the section of the thought process about his conversation about leadership, right? And it's talking about wanting to be a bigger leader and being a better example. I think in that sense, when you're taking that into account, it's important for him to be here during this stuff if he wants to kind of establish himself as a true leader on this team. Now, I mean, obviously, Micah Parsons is one of the best football players in the entire NFL. So the idea of him leading, as example, is always going to be there. I mean, he's always going to be a leader in that sense, that as a guy who performs on the field and produces, right? But if you want to be the kind of leader that like actually takes people somewhere, a lot of times you have to get vocal and you have to set an example, not necessarily during the games, like with your work ethic. And here's the other thing about this is that I would say, generally speaking, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in the second section as well, I think the idea that OTA attendance is a marker for commitments to the team is a little bit kind of antiquated, right? It's a little bit old-fashioned because it comes from a time when these guys weren't training professionally as athletes 365 days a year like they are now, right? Mm-hmm. Like these guys don't take time off as far as workouts and that sort of thing. They may take a week or two off, but
they're not having to work second jobs like players were in the 70s and 80s.
Well, right? It's not even that. It's not even, I mean, there was definitely that, right? Like back in the day when the guys were literally out of shape and had to work themselves back into shape, lose 20 pounds of beer gut in order to get into a shape to even do the workouts. That hasn't been the case for like 30 years.
Yeah.
And really, it hasn't been the case in the last 10 or 15 years, or maybe even more, that an athlete needed these practices in order to be fully committed to being good in the following season, right? Like this is important because it's practice, it's installs, that stuff is important. But for a guy who they're going to build the entire defense around, and frankly, you could really say the same thing about CeeDee Lamb in some sense, is that Dak needs to be here because he's the one running and calling the offense and installing and knows everything. But CeeDee's the guy that they're funneling the entire offense around. So they're just, he's going to need to be where he's going to need to be, and everyone else is going to work around him. And honestly, it's the same with Parsons. So I think there is in the leadership sense, in the sense that, hey, you want to be a leader, a good example, a guy that comes in and is the first guy to do reps. In that sense, it isn't great for his leadership style. But as far as like, is it going to have a huge negative effect at all in how he plays the game? Absolutely not. Like, it's going to have probably zero effect on his ability to go out there and rush the passer or make a tackle on a critical third down. Like, I just, and I think I would feel less about this with some of these other players. But for, again, Mike and CeeDee, the entire offense and defense is about making those guys work, right? So I think it's more that everybody else needs to get on the same page to help those two guys, as opposed to they need to get on the same page with the rest of the team, if that makes sense.
I'm glad that you brought up CD, because I actually think there's a difference between CD Lamb and Micah missing OTAs. Now, one of them is just contractual. Like CD Lamb is 1 year further along in the process.
Yeah.
What Micah Parsons is, he's playing on the 5th-year option. Like, I think it makes more sense for CD to skip OTAs than Micah Parsons. I don't think CD's skipping because he doesn't want to be there. He's skipping because he needs a new contract right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure why Micah's not there, unless he feels like he can get better, not at OTAs. He could, because remember, we got to remember these OTAs. There's no one-on-ones. There's no contact. It's really like install, right? You're doing
it is install.
Speed. Right, exactly. So maybe in Micah Parsons' eyes, he feels like it's better off for him to go be somewhere else working out and getting better. But I keep coming back to this podcast that CD Lamb, and I know I hate to take it back to this, but it was like, 2 weeks after the season, CD Lamb and Micah Parsons both talked about how they needed to be better leaders and how they needed to be more vocal this year. Like, they thought they both could step up their leadership abilities, and it's kind of hard to do that when one of the guys is missing all this offseason because of contract stuff, and the other one is missing because he just doesn't want to be there for whatever reason. It is curious, but back to the original point. I kind of agree with you. Like, it's just not a big deal. Like, I'm not worried that Micah Parsons' play is going to suffer at all from not being at OTAs. In fact, he's probably getting better working out somewhere else besides being at OTAs. It's just the fact that the Cowboys need him there. They're running a new defense. Everybody's looking up to Micah Parsons on defense. They really, really need him there.
This is exactly what I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure this is also what he's done the last 2 years.
Yes.
So I think the reason that we're paying more attention to it this year is because of, like you just said, he went on a podcast and said what he said, and the fact that the Cowboys are running a new defense, right? I think those are really the two main contributors to why this is a story this season as opposed to those other seasons. And again, like, does anyone have a problem with the way that Micah Parsons played the last two seasons when he missed? So
the play has absolutely nothing to do with it.
It has everything to do with what he said about himself, what they said about themselves, about wanting to be leaders, and about the perception of that in general. So as far as will it affect Micah Parsons being a great player? Absolutely not.
No.
Does it affect Michael Parsons' status as a vocal leader on this team? It absolutely does. But does Micah Parsons need to be a vocal leader in order for him to be an effective player? Absolutely not. It's just something that we'd like to see him take the next step. And maybe he's just not quite ready to do that yet. Maybe he still wants to do his own thing to get himself ready for the season. But I think eventually, if he wants to be the kind of leader that he's discussed, I think he's going to realize that he needs to be around for these kind of things, because it's important, not just for his own development, but for the development of the rest of the team around him.
And the last thing before we move on, I thought Mike McCarthy handled it really well yesterday when they were asking about, like, you could tell that he was annoyed that he's having to be asked about attendance for voluntary OTAs. What do voluntary mean, in the great words of Darren Hambrick, right? At the same time, he mentioned, like, we need Micah to be a leader, and he's missing valuable time here. The good news is we have all of training camp to kind of get him up to speed. But it's not like this isn't important either. I thought he walked that fine line really well yesterday, and not being overly critical, but also being like, hey, Michael, we kind of need you here.
Busting out the Hambrick line like he did was setting the perfect tone for it, right? It's like, this is voluntary. It's bonus if he had shown up. If he had shown up, would it have been a better situation? Absolutely. Is it a negative that he isn't showing up? Not really.
Yeah. Exactly. All right, let's talk about some things that actually happened during the OTA practice on Thursday. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. It's the formula for winning championships, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, whether you're into speed, power, or style. eBay Motors has got you covered with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Are you having to turn down the volume because of all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that unnecessary screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Landon, let's talk about some things that happened on the field. Tyler Guyton, Cooper Beebe, two of the Cowboys' highest picks in the 2024 NFL Draft, still working with the second team offense. How much does that concern you?
Yeah, and this is kind of something that I wanted to get into and that I kind of started a little bit yesterday. I think that there is a lot of kind of conjecture about the Guyton and Beebe working on the second team. And is that significant, or is that not a good situation because they're not getting the reps with the first team the way that you would want to in order to kind of get them in track to be starters? I just don't believe that that's how this works out. This isn't a padded training camp practice where snaps are being rationed out and timing has to be perfected between teammates while in pads at full speed. These practices, like we said, are about installs. They're about teaching the team equally. So they're designed so that the first team doesn't get more, reps or whatever you want, reps during the OTA practices. And the second team, it's designed so that all these guys get equal amounts of reps so that they can learn the offense. And this is the point of what we're doing here. Is this is the install, the learning of the offense part. Right. And that so that later when we get to Oxnard, they can compete. And frankly, to be honest, that's also the case in Oxnard for a little while. Like when they first get to Oxnard, they're still doing installs. They're still doing a certain amount of learning. So there isn't necessarily there's some points at Oxnard where the first and second team are getting equal amount of reps. So my point is that I think the concern we would have is that the first team offensive line wouldn't be working together in a full speed situation, or that the players that are rookies that need these snaps aren't getting enough of these snaps because they're buried on the depth chart. That isn't what is happening here. What is happening here is that all of these guys are going to get this, kind of install practice. They're all going to get these reps so that they can, internalize what they have to do. They're not going to have to fight for positioning or to get enough reps. Everyone is going to get it equally in order for them to be able to compete when training camp comes. So I will say this, that in these practices, it's not nearly as important, who's on first and second team because of that. But as this goes along, as the weeks go along, as we go into mini camp and then into training camp, then it becomes a little bit more concerning, right? As we kind of get through some of these installs and they actually start limiting some of these things, especially once we get some of these padded practices going, then it really does matter, who's getting reps with what, because you want to make sure at that point that you're getting, like the continuity conversation that McCarthy and the rest of these coaches have brought up, is that it's important to get continuity snaps with an offensive line altogether. But as it stands right now, I don't think it's a big deal that Guyton and Beebe are with the second team, simply because this is a situation where everyone's going to get the same information. They're all trying to get this install done. Guyton and Beebe are going to get those, installs and going to get those practice reps equal to the first teamers. as they all are trying to ingest this offense.
Yep.
And go for there. So I think it is something that's worth noting, but I think it's a little bit early to be concerned about it because as of right now, they're trying to make sure that every single player on this team has got the practice installed so that when it comes to competing time, everyone's kind of on an equal playing field.
All right. So just to recap where the Cowboys, or who was starting yesterday for the Cowboys, from left to right, it was Chuma Udoga, Tyler Smith, Brock Hoffman, TJ Bass started yesterday at right guard because Zach Martin was off to the side. I think they're just trying to really limit what he's doing. And then Terrence Steele at right tackle. Your second team offensive line was Tyler Guyton, Nathan Thomas, Cooper Beebe at center.
TJ Bass at right guard.
Was it TJ Bass at right guard again for the second team?
Yeah. I'm sorry. TJ Bass was at the right guard. No, it was Awesome Richards. That was actually another thing I wanted to bring up. Awesome Richards was playing some guard, which I think is significant, right? Because they're trying to get him ready to play kind of that swing guy, right? Swing guard tackle that be on the game day roster.
And then it was Matt Waletzko playing right tackle. It seems like the Cowboys are intent on leaving Matt Waletzko at right tackle and having Chuma Udoga be like their left side tackle / guard. I thought that was interesting. I just wanted to mention before, like, this is what the Cowboys do with the rookies. If you remember, go back to 2021, Micah Parsons was playing behind Leighton Vander Esch, Jalen Smith, and Keanu Neal that year, like going into OTAs and even into training camps, like they were splitting the action there. You'll remember Tyler Smith as a rookie during OTAs was playing behind Connor McGovern even during training camp. There were times where they were rotating. I think it was one of the first preseason games Connor McGovern started over Tyler Smith. So they like to slow roll some of these rookies with the idea that they're going to start like in week one. Like, I think that's ultimately the goal, is to have them ready for week one, but they're not going to just necessarily anoint them as these starters, despite kind of everybody knowing that's going to be the case. Like, Tyler Guyton's going to be your week one starting left tackle. I don't want to ruin the surprise for anybody, but he's going to start against Cleveland. And
listen, I think it's okay to be critical of that kind of slow roll process if you want. I mean, that's fine. I just think I just don't think it applies yet, right? Like, I think this is a time when it, the depth chart doesn't matter. We're teaching everybody equally at this point. I think once you start getting into pads or practices in which you're not just like learning and installing the playbook, but actually working on the nuances of the plays and the chemistry between the players, that's when it matters, right?
Once the pads come on is when it matters.
Yeah. But when, a couple guys jogging through this and this and that, I mean, you don't need to like work on what does Tyler Smith sound like when he's passing off a double team to me? I don't think they're doing that stuff during a slow OTA walkthrough. It's that stuff that comes later in training camp. And those reps are important. And that's when I will stand up as well and say, hey, let's get these guys at the first team so we can just get a couple extra reps, for them, the chemistry. And I think that's where that criticism is more legitimate.
I just don't care about OTA.
Yeah, that's fair. That's totally fair.
I just don't care. Once we get to training camp, and even I'm going to even put the stipulation, like the first 2 weeks of training camp anymore are just like a continuation of OTAs and mini camps. It's almost like once we get to August, that's when I'm going to start caring about, okay, who's starting and who's the backup and who is playing where. That's the first time that I'll actually care.
And the last thing I'll say, honestly, is, we have concerns. We have our own opinions. This is one area where the Cowboys have been pretty good, and that they've actually earned a little bit of trust as far as kind of, rolling these rookies out into having good seasons. I mean, Mozzie and Schoonmaker aside, but due to their situations, but I think as far as like getting these guys, especially offensive linemen, ready to play and prepared for the season, I think the Cowboys have earned a little bit of trust here. So,
yeah, I agree. I've got a bunch of other news, notes, and nuggets coming out of OTAs, and we're going to run through a bunch of them next. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We are discussing the biggest news and notes coming out of Thursday's OTA session that was at the Ford Practice Center. I've got a bunch of notes landing here. I'm going to run through some of them, and you just give me your thoughts. Some of these are way more impactful or important than others, including Deuce Vaughn lining up in the slot, getting some receiver action.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good to kind of. I think it makes sense, right? Just to try to give him another role, give him something else to do. I mean, look, he's kind of a guy that you are hoping to have as kind of a change of pace running back type. You're trying to work him in as kick returner. We'll see exactly, in training camp where he is and what to expect from him as far as a piece of this running back room. But I think in the meantime, you have to find a way. McCarthy talks about it all the time. We want guys who can do two things, right? And I think the kick return aspect, I mean, you're talking about a backup kick returner, but outside of that, he's not playing a ton of special teams. So I think having him kind of cross-train a little bit as a potential slot receiver, it gives you options for if there's injuries. It gives you options for if you want to deploy him in that way in order to kind of get him out there and get him the ball in space and more opportunities. It makes sense because, you need these guys to be a little versatile in order to kind of construct game day rosters and cover all the jobs that you need with the limited number of players that you're allowed to bring to a game day. But it also makes sense in the how do we get Deuce Vaughn the ball in space? Like getting him, like having him line up in the slot just gives him just a couple more opportunities or a couple more ways for the Cowboys to avail Deuce Vaughn of what he really does best, right?
And that's succeed. Yeah.
Have him with the ball in his hands on the other side of the line of scrimmage. Because ultimately, as a running back, my concern and what I think we've seen kind of played out so far is if the blocking isn't good, can Deuce Vaughn get back to the line of scrimmage? That's an issue. So hopefully with some better run blocking, I think we'll also get some better Deuce Vaughn results. I think, the ratio of who's going to get helped the most by better blocking is, I think Deuce Vaughn is the guy that's, crazy ahead of everyone else. Like he will be the one who will take the most advantage of that. But if for some reason, that plan doesn't work out, what are some other ways that we can get him isolated and get him the ball in space, put him in the slot and having him run routes there or doing special stuff from that slot? I think is a good way to do that.
It's just a way to try to get him some more snaps so he can potentially make the roster, because I think as of right now, I've got some major concerns that he's not going to be on the 53-man roster.
Yeah,
just being able to line up somewhere else for 3 snaps a game certainly can help. This next one is like catnip for Landon. Hunter Lipke having some first string reps as a running back for the Dallas Cowboys. Does it matter?
Oh, it matters. It's running back one has shown up.
Wouldn't that be like the funniest thing of all? We've been doing this whole offseason thing about the running back, and Hunter Lipke ends up becoming this team's starting running back.
I mean, this team is just all bruisers, no speed. It's just like hey, we've got Zeke, we've got Rico. Who should Rico Dowdle? How should we? I'm gonna keep doing that forever. Who are gonna off play these guys? How about we put a fullback in, like a fullback running back type? Yeah, look, I obviously have great affection for him and fullbacks in general. I love the idea of using a fullback as a running back, just as a change of pace. I hate that it's in this configuration where you feel like you've only got bruiser running backs, right? That's all you've got, and now you're adding in a fullback to kind of change of pace. Like I don't know, but as far as guys who I think deserve opportunities, look, he was one key fumble away from all of us being extremely excited about what he did at the end of the season, right? Yeah. Like I really think that they have a plan for him, and I wouldn't be shocked if he, had an uptick in touches this season, from the running back position, maybe getting thrown the ball out of the backfield as a fullback. Look, here's the other thing about this too, is you're going to carry him on the roster. He's a special teams player. He is your fullback. Yeah. So you might as well figure out some other ways for him to be useful, including carrying the rock by himself in single back situations. So might as well do it. Might as well throw him out there and let him be great.
You guys are going to have to excuse Landon. He grew up in the 1998 Tampa Bay Buccaneer team, watching Mike Allstott and Lorenzo Neal in the same backfield together, just running power over and over.
I'm not going to forget that. I guess so. It's yeah. And listen, it's not even just that. I grew up with Daryl Johnson. Okay, let's be clear. I grew up with Moose Johnson, and frankly, some of the great San Francisco fullbacks too. I used to love watching and play. I played fullback, so obviously I'm going to have an affinity for this kind of guy. I'm looking forward to what he does this season.
Yeah, it's not quite the same saying you grew up with Cricket Anderson. I know, I get it, but
No, it's not.
last couple notes here. We'll be quick on these ones. Brandin Cooks, from every beat reporter that was at practice, everybody says he looks faster, and the connection between him and Dak looks even better than it did last year. Maybe there's like a 20% chance that he's even better than we saw last year, and the wide receiver concerns are just overblown.
I think that there is that chance. I mean, I think that the chances that there is a chance that the percentage that he gets better in this system with the more familiarity with Dak is overcompensates for whatever age is done to him. You know what I'm saying? Like whatever, how much age is taken off. Because honestly, he looks incredible. Like he actually looked like incredible shape by all the pictures, and he's moving great. So yeah, I mean, until I've seen him like actually slow down or drop off a little bit, which I really feel like he didn't even at the end of last season.
No, I thought he looked good at the end of last year.
Yeah, I think that there's a great chance that he's better than he was this time last year, simply because he's got a lot more chemistry with Dak.
Two other really quick notes. Number one, Jalen Tolbert has switched to number one. He's also wearing a visor. So I'm just convinced that a breakout season is happening. The other one is Jalen Brooks. There was a couple notes from people that Brooks has really worked on his route running this year. Just looks like a completely different receiver. I actually feel pretty good about him locking down this wide receiver 4/wide receiver 5 job. I'm excited to see what Jalen Brooks looks like in year 2.
Yeah, honestly, the trajectory for both the Jalen's from last year is exciting. I think Tolbert, we started to see a little bit more as the season rolled off of what we saw in training camp, which is a guy who was really, really great in training camp.
Mm-hmm.
And then Brooks was a guy that, I mean, no one had any kind of expectations for a late round wide receiver draft pick, but just would not go away in training camp. Kept on making plays, and then was consistent through all the training camp, gets into the regular season, brings it to the regular season, is consistent as a target catcher, is a really, really good blocker on the edge. So I think in that role of special teams, rotational wide receiver, blocking tight end, I think Jalen Brooks is a very natural fit, and I'm excited to see what he does in training camp.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every day. Every day or next week, we've got some more OTA news and notes. I'm sure we're going to get some more news on some contract stuff. So make sure you're downloading the Locked On Cowboys podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on YouTube as well. Go follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosier. Enjoy your weekend, and we will see you right back here on Monday.